Okay, here we go. Can you hear me, Patricia? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Susan Gillis here, Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, very good. So welcome to Boca History 102, our virtual lecture series. Please, we have muted your microphone. Please don't unmute and don't join with video because we are recording this session. And we're going to provide a link to the recording to everyone who has signed up for this series. Now, today I'm going to be presenting some collection selections, what Patricia called the Curator's Corner, to share with you some of the breadth of our museum collections, a little bit about what we collect, why we collect, how we collect. And so I hope you'll find it interesting. It is going to run a little long, so you have to run off to lunch. You just do that. But I think you might get a kick out. So let me tell you a little bit. This is a little background. You don't have to read this. No reading here, right? The Boca Raton Historical Society Museum was founded in 1972 to collect, share, and preserve artifacts and information relevant to the history of Greater Boca Raton. And I include in that, within our city limits, West Boca, and as well as Highland Beach. Most local history museums, including our own, are principally what we call passive collectors. That means people give stuff to us all the time. And this is true of most small history museums. We simply do not have the kind of budget to actively pursue collections, except in very rare cases. Occasionally we buy a book for the library and so on. We'd rather spend our money on, salaries and stuff like that. What we can do, though, is provide you with a receipt, which you may be able to use for income tax purposes, depending on your personal situation. We cannot provide an appraisal because the IRS considers this a conflict of interest. Now, by accepting things into its collection, every museum has an unspoken obligation to be a good steward of that thing, possibly for eternity. And we do consider things like size and condition when we consider objects for the collection. But most of all, what does this say about Boca Raton history? And I'm going to go more into this when I get into the meat of the presentation. Now, I personally have been in the history museum related business since the 70s. And so I have a really good amount of experience in collecting items, cataloging, and making them accessible through lectures, publications, and exhibitions. I have a really good sense of what maybe we should keep versus what we don't need to worry about. So let's talk a little more about that. I'm often asked, what's the oldest thing in the collection? And that's easy. We have some archaeological material, not a lot, but we know that the pre-Columbian people of Boca Raton were here as long ago as 500 BC, imagine. These are potsherds. The ones on the left are from Boca Weir site in Highland Beach. The others were found right on our Boca Beach by our friends at Barrett's many decades ago. Now, the two items on the right are unusually large for potsherds. And you can see they're rim shards. That means they're from probably bowls, pretty large vessels. And the top two examples have holes in them. They're called mending holes. So back then, pottery was a little bit of a luxury item in this part of the world because we don't have a decent clay source. So that means either the clay was imported or the pots. And if you broke one, not too badly, you didn't just toss it. You would drill holes in the separate pieces very carefully and lash them together. Can you imagine? So these are unusual examples of potsherds. Now, you can't have street cred as a history museum without a cannon or two in your collection. And since we are in a coastal town, here they are. These are from wrecks that happened right off our shores, right off a red reef, 100, 200 years ago, 300 years ago now. One is a 4-pounder, one's a 3-pounder. That is the size of the cannonball or the shot. We don't know what happened to the crew or even the rest of the wreck, but these survived. The item on the right, which I call baby cannon, weighs at least 350 pounds. So it is no little thing. And it will be featured in our new History Alive exhibit. Now here's a collection of interesting artifacts found right on the beach near Yamato Rock, formerly Jack Rock, after Hurricane Sandy, which was a very erosive event here. And according to our county archaeologists, it's likely they were eroded out of the bluff rather than being washed ashore by the waves. What have we here? We have a rifle escutcheon, a military buckle, the butt of a pistol or knife handle with a face on it, a piece of a ramrod, the back of a military button, a disc. It is not a coin, it's coin size, it's not a coin, and two pieces of lead shot, musket balls, the diameter of which are diagnostic for 1840. Now, 1835 to 42, Second Seminole War, a lot of it took place in Southeast Florida. We know in 1842, Captain Wade marched his men from Fort Jupiter to the 3rd Fort Lauderdale, which was located at the South Beach parking lot opposite Bahia Mar. And we know in 1843, there were two homesteaders in the vicinity of Highland Beach, we're not sure exactly where, named Cobb, father and son. Could these artifacts be from either of these sources? We may never know. It's just an intriguing part of the puzzle. Now, Thomas Rickards came in the early 1890s, bought a lot of property in our area, and he was a grower and a surveyor. So he was hired to plat the town of Boca Raton. And so he's our founding citizen. And we're blessed to have many of his survey books, account books, and various memorabilia. On the left is his filing cabinet, and you can see the names of some of the files are Black Cat Plantation. That was the name of his property here in Boca. Now, I happen to be personally very fond of black cats, so I think that's pretty cool. And on your right, we have an account book from 1895. And notice how Rickards spelled Boca Raton. No E. At left, we have one of his survey maps. They're terrifically important. From circa 1903. You can see Lake Boca, Lake Wyman, Lake Rogers. That straight line in the middle there is the railroad track. The curvy line at the left is what is now El Rio Canal. The red arrow points to a stop on the railroad called Wyman. Within a year or two of this map, it would become Yamato. Now, we know there was some kind of settlement at Wyman because there was a post office there in 1902. Somebody lived there. What we don't know is who it was or why they were there. And this is after years of trying to research this, along with my buddies at the Delray Historical Society and the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. So someday we may know. Rickards also corresponded with our Japanese settlers. Here we have an envelope from Mr. Sakai, the founder of the Yamato colony, to Rickards. And notice how he likes to spell Raton. And on the right, we have a list of original property owners in Pearl City. Pearl City was established for the African-American community back in 1915. So these are Pearl City pioneers. We also are blessed to have the collections of the Cheeseburger family. They came in 1903. Frank kept a daily diary until he died in the 30s. I've spoken about this before. And we have transcribed them to the best of our ability. His diaries are a time machine. And they represent not only Boca Raton history, but South Florida history as well. Few of our sister agencies in our area are blessed to have collections like the Rickards and Cheeseburger Collection. They just don't. We've been very, very fortunate. And as I say, the diaries tell not just about Boca Raton history, but about South Florida history as well. And I certainly have used them in other contexts. So we're really fortunate to have this terrific collection. Imagine how the world changed, even in little Boca Raton, between 1903 and 1930s. This is supposedly the first inn in town. I think it's pretty awesome. And it was at Mr. Brank's store, which was on what is today Northwest First Avenue. So west of the FEC tracks and north of Palmetto. And you can see the Brank store had gas pumps. And it served as a post office on occasion. Back then, the post office would move from, general store to general store. We have roughly 100 oral history interviews in our collection, and these are very precious. Most of the interviewees, of course, are no longer with us. Here's an example of an interview with Alvin Fountain and his daughters Willie Mae and Almeda about why they came to Boca Raton back in 1915, or Mr. Alvin Fountain came in 1915. And most of the interviews have been transcribed and digitized, but they are wonderful resources, particularly on the early days of our history. Mayor John Brown was our first elected mayor back in 25. And as far as I know, he is the only one to claim a gold badge of his own. And of course, our current mayor is most envious, naturally. We have a lot of Meisner stuff, no surprise here. These are architectural drawings. Now, Addison himself did not draft these. He would have draftsmen. So he was the brains. He would say, draw this, and then they would draw them. And we have two Floresta houses, House C and House H. But we do have a lot of sketches by the master's hand, several hundred of these amazing sketches. It seems to me that Addison used sketches on any piece of paper that was at hand, as you can see, the way we use our phone camera. And so he would draw, if he saw something beautiful, he would record it, or if he got an idea, he would jot it down. Two of these are actual Palm Beach mansions, Lago Mar, not Mar-a-Lago, Lago Mar and Playa Riente in Palm Beach. The picture of the columns are signed with his initials, AM. And he, on many of them, for example, the window seat detail and the over-the-top lantern at left, have a lot of his notes. And his writing is very legible and very distinctive. And what I found very amusing is that he has no trouble spelling cornice, frieze, and architrave. But column is always C-O-L-U-M-B, and height is H-I-T-E. Because when you are an artistic genius, I guess you don't need to know how to spell. We also have about 90 of these full-size newspaper ads. More ads exist. It's just we happen to have 90 hard copy. And yes, they are digitized. The one on the left is a staff favorite, kind of for obvious reasons. But the one on the right is my favorite because people are coming by every means possible to one spot on the entire planet. Talk about hyperbole. Now, here's some more Meisner treasures. These are scrapbooks. We have two large scrapbooks of the Meisner Development Corporation, and they are about the size of a full-size, old-fashioned newspaper. So they're very large. And yes, Sue Gillis personally digitized every single article independently and every single newspaper photo in these two. So they will be preserved for future generations because they're almost 100 years old. Now, on the right, here are a couple of pictures of what is today the Addison, the ad building, as we most know it, back in, say, 26 or so. And the picture in the upper right is particularly interesting to me. This is taken between the north and south buildings, so in the courtyard between the two buildings. And we're looking east towards where you enter from the parking lot today if you were coming as a visitor. But if you were standing in this very spot now, you would be in the middle of a banyan tree. So that's why these are very valuable. We have a lot of Meisner Industries, something we collect because of our interest in Meisner and his association with us. And it's something I've spent many years researching. There's a lot of misinformation out there about Meisner Industries. There's really only a few hundred items that we can say for sure are Meisner Industries. But here's one. This sconce looks like it was forged in a Spanish forge, blacksmith forge, hundreds of years ago, but not so. And that's what it's supposed to look like. And I always laugh because the Morse Industries ironwork reminds me of something that you either torture somebody with or roast a pig on. As my brother, the electrician, says, not UL approved. This sconce is the very sconce you see under the arch in this picture of the Meisner lobby. And when it was removed a number of years ago by the hotel, it was the last surviving fixture from the Cloister Inn. Not the Boca Raton Club. There's quite a few of those still around, but from the Cloister Inn. So we're very, very pleased to have it. The center image is a close-up of a guest room at the Cloister. You can see on the left a similar lamp. It is stamped Las Manos pottery, and I know it looks like the photo's out of focus, but it's stamped that's out of focus. And yes, that hot dog mustard yellow is the original glaze color. There at the upper center, that is a toothbrush holder. Clever, huh? And the blue color, that turquoise color, is called Meisner blue. That was his favorite. And to the right, we have three of these little chest of drawers, and they would have appeared in the guest rooms at the hotel. We also have about 28 of these headboards, and they were from the Cloister Inn. Now, we know they were, technically speaking, designed by an artist, but a lot of the painting is, well, what can I say? Folk art, okay, funky. They're all antiqued. And they are imitative of Spanish Baroque headboards, which would have elaborate scenes painted on them, many of them religious, with gilding and all that sort of thing. So that's what the model for these is. Now, the one on the left is kind of one of my favorites. There are two creatures we call dolphins. They look like seahorses. They kind of have googly eyes. And then the flowers, to me, remind me of Ricky Ticky Stickies from the Volkswagen Beetle. But they're not from the 60s. They're from the 20s. Now, I know you're asking yourself, so what the heck do you need with that many headboards? They're different. They're not all the same. So a lot of these headboards and a lot of items in our collection will never be on exhibit. We don't just collect to put things on exhibit. We collect to preserve them for posterity, for future generations. And these constitute a study collection. So just like at a natural history museum where you have a lot of examples of a given specimen, we have a lot of examples of Meisner Industries headboards for the use of anybody who is researching decorative arts and Meisner Industries in particular, because each one represents a different amount of information. Each one is constructed a little different. The decorative detail is different. The other thing I wanted to mention is these and many other things, many other furnishings in our collection were actually rescued, salvaged from the administration building back around 1980. Up until that time, the hotel still owned the ad building. And it was at that juncture, it was sold, it was renovated to become the Addison's restaurant, as you may recall. But until then, in those latter years, the Boca Raton Hotel used it really as a storage area, and they dumped all the old furniture in there, let it get rained on and what have you. So our volunteers went in there and collected what the hotel considered to be junk. They realized was very important Meisner Industries pieces, which today are quite collectible just because of that association with Mr. Meisner. So they were very far-sighted indeed. Here's another example of that. I got a call from Ron Weeks, a florist in Del Rey, years ago, and he says, Sue, your former president, Mary Lou Red, rescued the windows from the Cloister Inn years ago, and they've been in my storage. I have to get rid of them. Well, I was highly skeptical. I hear this story all the time. So I went up there, and guess what? Yes, they are. There are 11 of them. Again, they're different. The one on the left sort of in the best shape. They were from the Meisner dining room, not to be confused with the cathedral room. That is not the same. Cathedral dining room is different. The Meisner dining room today on the ground floor is the ice cream shop, the passage, the hall between the palm court and the grand staircase and the sushi bar. And the second floor is the Meisner room, meeting room on the second floor landing. Now, all those rooms, except for the Meisner room, are going to change, by the way, because the hotel is being remodeled. So, but these windows probably taken out in the 60s or something like that. Meisner used a lot of his personal antiques to decorate the public rooms of the hotel. This is a Bargueno. The Bargueno is the top part. The bottom part is obviously an antique as well, but those two weren't, in other words, they weren't built at the same time necessarily. The Bargueno is basically a traveling chunk that opens into a desk, very Spanish form. And the exteriors often look very similar. They have ironwork. There's little lions for Castile and Leon. But inside, they're all different. And ours is very beautiful. It has gold leaf. It has ivory inlay. It has bone. It's just amazing. And it's hundreds of years old. And at center, if you look in the background, you can see the Bargueno sitting in front of a tapestry. And that was in Mr. Geist's apartment. He was the second owner of the hotel, back at the hotel in the 30s. On a completely different note, apparently Boca Raton was crawling with rattlesnakes back in the day. And so here's some rattlesnake rattles rescued, acquired by Denver Britton in Old Foreste, who was caretaker there back in the 30s. Floyd Mitchell survived the Depression here in Boca Raton, and when you needed a new dress in those days, you didn't necessarily go to the store, but you could take an older fashion and remake it to be a little more current. So this is Floyd Mitchell makeover dress. We have a lot of World War II memorabilia. Here are some very interesting pieces. This coffee can came from a merchant ship that was attacked by a German U-boat right off our shore, floated ashore near the Boca Raton villas, where it was found by the Barretts, who lived there at the time. It's still sealed, it's still presumably good to the last drop. And in addition, we have Granddad Barrett's address book with a list of the torpedo incidences in May of '42. These two items are not just relevant to Boca Raton history. They don't just tell American history. These are items of importance to world history. These are very rare survivors. I can't believe they survived. And we're very, very pleased that we can preserve them forever in our collections. Another World War II treasure is this map. Now, first, I want to say a shout out to the city. Richard Randall in particular. Richard is retired from the city today, but he worked with planning and other departments, making maps and charts for many years. And he made sure that when those departments clean out the closet, that we receive the hard copy of the maps. What he would do is he digitizes them, so they have them on record. But a lot of these are maps that are, are obsolete essentially. But obsolete is our middle name. That's history to us. So I want to thank him so much for everything he has done for us on the behalf of the Historical Society, because he's very, very aware of the importance of preserving these wonderful resources. Ditto to the CRA. They're really good. CRA is really good about when they have some obsolete material, out of date material. They give me a call. And our city clerk happens to be our former president. So we receive many things from the city. They realize it's important to preserve for future generations. A few years ago, this map arrived in a big envelope that said order of takings, and I knew immediately what it was. It is a diagram showing the parcels acquired by the government by eminent domain to build the Boca Raton Army Airfield, and the list of property owners and how much acreage they had. Now, this answered so many questions we had had. It just been speculation before. I can't tell you. For one thing, there's about 6,000 acres here. Less than 300 belong to people with Japanese surnames. Not to belittle their role in this, they certainly suffered indignities, not in being interned, as you will recall, but they were paid for their property. But you can see a lot of other people had their property acquired too. The big loser in all this is actually the Lake Worth Drainage District. Very, very interesting and important resource. Here's a couple of more World War II items from our friend Dr. Walters at FAU. Apparently he tripped over this runway light. Imagine that, surviving the bulldozers and everything. And it is from World War II era. And I think he got the towel on eBay. Anyway, I think it's hilarious. Why would you bother? Why would the government bother to pay for a towel, a linen towel like in the bathroom to be, you know, woven Boca Raton feel? I don't know. Maybe it's like those very expensive wrenches and things like that. Makes me laugh. Now, we have about 16,000 photos in our collection now. And of course, that's really a talk for another day. But I wanted to share a few with you. This is Irene Damari, a real Boca pioneer. And she met her hubby Archie when he served at the Boca Raton field. And this is not their automobile, but they did less in their heart after it. You can see Irene loving on the bumper. And ironically, their church, their longtime church, Ebenezer Baptist, in the background. These desks are from the Roman School, which served the Black community until the 60s when it was phased out. And they were rescued by Trudy Borchardt, our longtime resident, and given to our museum by Diane in her memory. Diane's her daughter. And they will appear in our History Alive exhibit. Now, this is just another Borchardt photo, and I had to share it with you because it makes me laugh. Apparently, back in the early 50s, you could go down to the inlet and grab all the shrimp and Florida lobster you can eat, and it was edible. And for some reason, Dad lined up all these Florida lobsters like they're worshiping the Christmas tree. So to me, it is an extremely surreal Florida Christmas scene. I just had to share it with you. We have doors from the Cabana Club. That was the Boca Raton Hotel's beachfront access down where the Addison condominium is today at Via Cabana and A1A. And of course, it was replaced by the Beach Club in about 1980, the early 80s. The vent holes in the doors, of course, are in the shape of ratones. Here's another treasure. In 1963, we finally got a high school, but our first graduating class isn't until 66. In 65, though, the varsity baseball team won the state championship. This was unbelievably thrilling for this brand new little tiny high school. So a few years ago, the survivors turned over the signed ball from the team. And by the way, we're still looking for the trophy. The high school has misplaced it, or anyway, it has disappeared. So we're on the look. It could be in private hands. Now, in this regard, I want to mention our friend Linda Jackson. She's over there on the right. She made this happen. And Linda was, lived here as a youngster, went to high school with this class. So she keeps in very good touch with her fellow alum, the old Boca II, Facebook, Boca Raton Pioneer Club, and so on. And anytime she sees a photo or an object like this that people share, she'll write to them, why don't you donate that to the Historical Society? Your kids don't want that, they're going to throw it away. Okay, so she is absolutely correct, but this is not something that Sue feels she can say to these poor people. So Linda has been responsible for a lot of wonderful donations, especially in the past few years. So let me show you some of those. Here's the letter sweater from a Boca High cheerleader, Mibby Lester, given by her family. And I believe Mibby was class of 66. And here's the regalia of the last queen of the Fiesta de Boca Raton. So the Fiesta was held in the 60s. It was a citywide festival to raise money to build our hospital, which it was successful at. And Carol Hutchin was the last queen of the last Fiesta. And so she inherited the regalia and she very kindly turned it over to us. And the crown will be featured in our new exhibits. Now, shout out to Lee Weaver and Paul Avery. for remembering the world famous keg. It was located in an old funky 20s building at the parking lot of the pavilion at A1A. And the keg was a hamburger joint, beer joint, and whatever else joint. So a very fond memory by all you former hippies. We have a lot of IBM memorabilia. This is a case of not passive collecting, but of active collecting. We've actually sought memorabilia from the IBM retirees, and they have been wonderfully, wonderfully responsive. So I want to share a couple of those items with you. This is the IBM PC. And as you know, the PC is the ancestor of all PC-style computers. It was IBM's foray into the personal computer market, and it was manufactured here in Boca Raton back in '81. This belonged to our friend Fred Getz. He was part of the original design team for the PC. And this is actually a pre-production PC with no serial number. So in the world of computer history, this is a sacred relic. Now, we have a lot of other examples. We have multiple PCs, PC Juniors, ATs, XTs, multiple copies, shall we say. And in this case, these are not study collections because they're manufactured items. The reason we have more than one is like an auto salvage yard. We have backup computers so we can cannibalize them to make one of them work. Because when one of these parts goes in one of these vintage, I call them, what do I call them? Heritage technology, you're going to be hard pressed to track down the right parts. So it's much better if you have them at hand. Here's an example. This is PC Junior. It was not a success for IBM. It personally is my personal favorite. It was a home oriented gaming computer. Number one, it had slots for gaming cartridges, which IBM abandoned after this. They said, nobody's going to do this, of course, and then Nintendo came along. It also had the infamous chiclet keyboard. You can see it upper right. Again, this was Fred's idea, so he's very defensive about this. He tells a great story. Number one, the chiclet keyboard was wireless. Nobody knew what the heck to do with a wireless keyboard. They couldn't handle it. And number two, you notice the letters aren't on the keys. Well, that is because the function of the keys would change depending on what program you were using, be it a game or word processing. So every program would come with an overlay like shown at lower right to tell you what the function of the keys were. Remember, we didn't have a computer mouse yet. So the PC Junior is pretty common. There's a lot of those around. Chiclet keyboard's even fairly common. What isn't common is the overlay and a PC Junior compact thermal printer, not a dot matrix, thermal printer that, by the way, still works. We have about 8,000 photos from the Boca Raton News, courtesy our friend Skip Sheffield. They are primarily from the 80s and early 90s. So after that, the news switched to digital, and unfortunately, I do not know what has happened to the digital photos. Could be in those photographers' hands. And I deduce that every time the newspaper moved, they threw out their old photos and their old clippings file, which is a great tragedy for us, as historians. But unfortunately, we can't undo that. But we got the 1980s covered real good, okay? And nothing says 1980s better than Madonna. Here's a Votomatic voting machine with a butterfly ballot from the infamous 2002 presidential election. That's courtesy the county commission. Now, here's what I call an ideal artifact, curatorially speaking. Number one, it says, Boca Raton is a beach town in Florida, not in the middle of Nebraska. It's a beach map. Number two, it says where it's from. And number three, it says when it's from. Triple threat. That's the ideal artifact. Now, I know you're all thinking, Sue, this is only from 2004. Okay, well, here's the lesson. My mantra is in 100 years, it will be 100 years old. And it's a lot easier to collect contemporary artifacts with discretion. We don't take everything, rather than go back in time and get what you want. And I always ask myself, if this were from 1920, would it be cool? Would we want it for the collection? And the answer is yes. And by the way, 2004, 17 years ago, you guys. Holy smoke. How do you say Boca Raton loves sea turtles? I don't want any turtles, dead or alive, in my collection. But we did collect these nest signs, and there's one for each species that calls our beaches home. And last but not least, yes, indeed, we have been documenting COVID-19 since over a year ago. We have photographs, we have memories, and we welcome yours, by the way. Still collecting, it's still ongoing, isn't it? These are from our friends at the THOS Fashion School, which is just up the road from Town Hall. And they were figuring out how to make masks when they were very hard to come by. And it was a way to pay the students. They'd all been laid off their little part-time jobs and everything. And we want to thank them very much. And for all of you who contributed to our COVID-19 project. So thank you all for joining us. If you have some items that you think would be appropriate for our collection, please give us a heads up. We have to consider things like size and condition and things of that nature, but we're very interested, as you can see, in all sorts of things that reflect everyday life in Boca Raton history. That's what I particularly find interesting and relatable. And we want to thank all of our donors of all of our archives, objects, photographs over the years who have made the wonderful collection that we have today. And we will be sharing some of that with our new exhibits. This concludes our Boca History 102 lecture series. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're already talking about Boca History 201 in a few months, which you will be happy to know will not involve Patricia or myself doing this talking. So if you have some ideas on some topics relating to Boca history or speakers, we would love to have some names, phone numbers, emails, that kind of thing. So please reach out to us. Thank you all for joining.